And I guess, Tim, I'd like you to jump in and start with your welcome from the chamber, and then we'll do our sponsor video, and then we can get started.
Well, sure, and thank you, Lynn, and good morning, and thank you for joining us for the Civility Project discussion with Stephen Henderson and Nolan Finley. I would like to thank Delta Dental for the support in making today's program possible. I think they're doing this throughout the state and other communities as well, and so we certainly appreciate them bringing this opportunity to our region. And I think also to our regional partners, the Black Business Alliance of Greater Lansing and the Greater Lansing Hispanic Chamber of Commerce as well for their partnership in today's program. And I'm not sure that there's a more timely time right now for the discussion that's going to occur and everything that's happening in our world, from race relations to the political divide that in the 15 years I've been at the Chamber, I've never seen it this great on the local level as well, to navigating and living in a global pandemic. And I'm not sure there's ever been greater need for the civility, respect, and what I think is really important and much needed is the education on these and other critical issues facing our society today. And so, how do you address these challenges, the opposing viewpoints, common sense solutions in a positive, productive, constructive manner? Well, let me tell you, it's not easy, but we know that Nolan and Stephen through the Civility Project are providing a roadmap, and we're certainly pleased to welcome them here today. So thanks again for joining us, and we certainly hope you enjoy the discussion. And Lynn, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you to all of our sponsors. We're so grateful to Delta Dental for very generously sponsoring the Civility Project so that we can bring these sessions to all of you. And so I'll just do a little plug that if this is interesting to you and you'd like to bring it to your workplace, to your community, to your organization, please let me know. You can email me. I'll put my email in the chat. And you can also put your email there and I will get back to you as well. Likewise, we send out a monthly newsletter that just sort of gives some additional tips for how people can continue to build civility. You'll learn a little bit today. And then as you start to do that in your lives, you might want some support or some additional ideas to keep going. And so we'd love to have you on our list. If you'd like to be on our mailing list, you can either go to greatlakescivilityproject.com and sign up, or you can put your email in the chat and I'll make sure you get on the list. But before we start, I would really love to share a video from our sponsor. And so let's do that very quickly. Here we go.
Okay.
Lynn, we're not hearing the sound.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. So you didn't hear any of that?
No.
All right, well, I will have to investigate that and continue it when we finish. So we'll start with you guys and we'll go back to Delta Dental's video as soon as I figure out the technical difficulties. So my apologies.
Okay.
Let's jump in. So Stephen and Nolan, I'd love for you to start by introducing what the Civility Project is, and maybe we begin with the two of you sharing how you came together and what your idea is for making this happen.
You go first, Nolan.
I went first last time.
Oh yeah, that's right, you did. I forgot that. I can go. The Civility Project is I think best described as an outgrowth of the things that I think Nolan and I have learned over about 12 years of friendship now about what it means to be friends with somebody who you really disagree with, who you just see the world fundamentally in a different way than, it's our effort to try to share that with other people at a time when those kinds of relationships are not just at a premium, but at an incredibly rare, an incredibly rare space. you think about the ways in which we interact with each other right now, I mean, they're pretty awful. And there is a lot of not just tension, but animosity and antipathy that attends interactions between people who can't agree. And Nolan and I, over the last 12 years, I think, have found a space where we are okay disagreeing, and we are okay even disagreeing passionately or very strongly. But we're able to put that disagreement in the context of a sort of broader relationship, and so that it does not become a reason to walk away, to dismiss the other person, or to let it devolve into the worst kinds of interactions that we see. Nolan and I are very different. We see things fundamentally differently when it comes to things like politics and economics and all of the issues that through our work we're called to try to understand and help other people understand. We just don't see things the same way. And that was evident from the very beginning when I was the editorial page editor at the Detroit Free Press in the late 2000s, and Nolan was the editorial page editor and still is at the Detroit News. He was the conservative, I was the liberal. We were brought together in work as a way of, featuring the kind of yin and yang opposition that is very popular, especially on television. But over time, that relationship became about much more than those interactions. I mean, we really came to understand and like each other. And over that time, we figured out how to make sure we can disagree without becoming disagreeable. The project itself got a real boost a couple of years ago when the NPR program StoryCorps came to Detroit. StoryCorps is an effort to try to document American stories about relationships. You go down and for an hour sit with somebody that you have a relationship with and talk about that relationship, how it came about, how it sort of maintains itself, why it's valuable to each person. When they came to Detroit, I knew lots of people who took their spouses or took family members with them down to record their stories. I took Nolan because I said I really wanted us to sit there and talk about this relationship that we had, and not talk about the differences that we have between us and the differences that we kind of feature in our work, but to talk about where our ideas come from, where our take on the world comes from. Why do we think the things that we do? And in doing that, I think we both learned a lot about the other, things that we hadn't learned before. And I think actually came to value more what the other person was saying and why they believed what they believed. And after that, we really thought that this was a way to get to a space where you can have a relationship with somebody that you disagree with, knowing more about them, knowing more about where they come from, where their ideas come from, makes it easier to not react viscerally to the things that they say or believe, but to put it all in some context and understand that they are more than the sum of those beliefs, and that those beliefs come from a lifetime of experience and activity. And so in the last couple of years, we've been sharing that experience with other people. We've been asking groups like yours to come together, talk about this, but then also on a more individual level, find the opportunity to have that kind of exchange with somebody that you don't agree with.
Yeah, and this didn't used to be uncommon. I can remember the late John Dingell telling stories about how some of his closest friends over his long career in Washington were people who sat on the other side of the aisle, people whom he fought with all day long over policy, and then came together for a game of handball or for drinks and dinner, and they were, they hunt together. They were among his closest friends. We used to sort of not be that surprised when that happened, but somehow over the last couple of decades, I believe we've allowed our politics to put us in bunkers and to isolate us from each other. And a lot of factors go into it, whether it's cable TV, social media. You could point in a dozen different directions, but it became much more uncommon for people to interact on a very personal level with people they fundamentally disagreed with politically. And there's a broader impact to that. It's not simply about, oh gosh, shouldn't we all just love each other and be friends? I mean, there are consequences to this sort of bunker mentality we have in America today, in that we seem at every level to be unable to converse in the way that leads to solutions and that leads to sort of a middle ground. Compromise has become a dirty word. Consensus has become something that's scoffed at, looked down upon. There's an all or nothing mentality that comes out of this idea that, we have to have our side and their side, and we can't cross the lines. And, I think it's hurt us deeply in this country to this idea that, when you have the majority, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to talk to us. And then when we have it, we're going to do the same thing. This idea of consensus, because most Americans do live in the middle. And we spend very little time in our official roles in the middle. And I think this is an effort on Steve and I's part to bring people together, at least to be able to talk productively about solutions. He and I disagree on terms of our politics and policies as much as any two people could disagree. And yet we agree that we need, at the end of the day, pragmatic solutions. And there's only one way to get there, and that's talking across our divides.
So thanks for that introduction, you guys. It's a really nice foundation from which to begin our conversation. And so I'm encouraging people who are with us to put questions in the chat so we can ask those. Some things that I'd like us to bring up in this session today are, first of all, how we build civility. So how do we go about doing that? So if we're surrounded by people who share opinions and really have the same perspective as us, do we seek out people who are different? And then what steps do we take? Or if it's family members around a holiday table, how do we build civility? And then we will get to such topics as politics. We're in a presidential election year, the pandemic crisis, civility in a crisis, as well as race relations. So we're going to touch on all of those, but I thought we could begin with this notion of where do we start? How do we go about building civility?
Well, where we start in our sessions, and normally, before COVID, when we would do these sort of programs, we would work with the sponsoring organization to pair people off who didn't agree with each other, and have them talk and learn something about each other the way we did in the StoryCorps session Stephen mentioned, and that is ask about experiences and values and beliefs before you ever start talking about the more difficult issues. Try to figure out what motivates the other person, the person you disagree with, because our basic premise is that most people are good and decent people who come to their opinions the same way. They take a look at the facts, the information at hand, they apply their own values and experience, and then form an opinion. And if it's different from yours, that doesn't make them evil. It doesn't make them un-American. It doesn't make them ignorant. They just have different values and experiences that they're acting on. And if you understand what those values and experiences are, you have a more honest discussion. and a more open-minded discussion.
Yeah, and we also talk a lot about, the kind of principles of civility and the things that I think we've learned over time really make for an actual civil exchange instead of something that is, forcibly civil or fake civil. One of them, of course, is the idea of not avoiding controversy, not avoiding disagreement. Nolan and I don't sit around and say, well, we can't talk about this thing because it's too hot, or I don't want to get into it about this. We have the kind of exchanges that I think you would hope to have with somebody that you disagree with, where both sides are really passionate, both sides are certain that they understand the issue and want to get their points across. And sometimes it gets really heated, and sometimes one of us gets mad. That's okay, and that's really the point. I think too often people confuse the word civility with politeness or ease, and that is not what we're talking about. It's not what we do. The idea is that you can have those really passionate feelings and emotions and exchanges and still be able to deal with one another and respect one another. In order to do that, though, I think there are some things that are pretty important, and they are things that are kind of uncommon, I think, in relationships where people don't come from the same place politically or economically or culturally. One of them is the intentional act of listening. Actually listening to the person that you're talking to or debating with. And I say that in each of the sessions, and I always get a lot of nodding when I say it, but listening, I think it's important to understand listening is not just the act of not talking, right? Just because you're not saying something doesn't mean you're really listening to the person that you're interacting with. A lot of times when someone else is talking, we're sitting and thinking about what we might say in answer to what they're saying. We're thinking about the argument itself and not really trying to place value in what the other person is really trying to say and where they're coming from. It's a more intentional act than just not talking. It is about the way that you are hearing and taking in what the other person is saying. The other really important principle that I think goes into civil exchanges is the idea of not ever deciding that the disagreement that you're having is bigger than the interaction, the relationship with the person that you're talking to. And that's also really difficult. Think of how often right now we're encouraged to just kind of walk away, block somebody on social media. It's one of those, that's one of the dynamics that I think social media has really introduced into the culture that's really damaging. This idea that I am so done with you that I am shutting you out of my thoughts and of any chance to interact with me. Nolan and I have had really, really intense disagreements about things, really bitter exchanges sometimes about things. And at the end of it, neither one of us has ever gotten up and said, that's it, I'm done with this guy. I'm not talking to him anymore. I don't want to do this. That takes, again, real intentionality. You have to decide that it matters that this person who I disagree with is there for me to disagree with, and that I will come back to this conversation. I will come back to this exchange, not as a way of trying to convince that person or change that person, but because I value the exchange itself. I value the fact that this person sees the world a little differently than I do, and I learned something
Yeah.
from that exchange.
And that's key. I mean, you got to go into this with the right spirit, and if you go into it thinking, well, I'm going to prove I'm right, you're probably not going to have a productive conversation. If you go in there thinking, well, who knows, I may learn something, or at least I may hear something that causes me to check and verify my own position, because we do tend to get very smug about our own positions. But I guess I would say that what we're really trying to do is take the hate out of our interactions. You think about your own selves. How many times you hear yourself saying, oh, I hate that person, based on what you hear them say in terms of their politics, but you don't really know that person. And I always tell the story. Steve and I, several years ago, were up on Mackinac Island for the Republican State Convention, which was a very uncomfortable place for Steve. He was just starting out as the editorial page editor of the Free Press, and here he finds himself on an island he can't get off of, surrounded by Republicans. And he and I were drinking in one of the establishments up there, and two ladies came up who I knew. As I walked away from Steve, they said, how could you be friends with him? How could you talk to him? He's so awful. We just hate him. And I said, you hate him? I said, have you met him? They said, no. I said, I tell you what I want you to do. Go over there to the bar and spend a few minutes talking to him, and then tell me what you think. And it was like 2 hours later, I had to pull Steve out of the bar because they couldn't get enough of him. They took the time to know him from somebody other than, what they read in the newspaper. I think that's what we're trying to do when we started putting together bourbon nights in Detroit and up on Mackinac. Just get people to talk first before they decide that they hate somebody or don't like somebody. And, you can, once you move past that point, you can begin to have meaningful conversations. And, you may never change somebody's view, but that shouldn't be your goal. If you can learn from them and hopefully they learn from you. Steve always says that, our methods, that, and our ideas for getting to a place, vastly different. But in general, we want to get to the same place. We want to solve our community's problems. And, we have different ideas for getting to a solution, but in general, we agree on the solution. Things need to get better and people need to do better. And, we're not going to get there if we don't talk to each other.
So
you got some questions, Lynn, right?
Yeah, we have some great questions coming in. So I want to put a couple of them together. So Elizabeth asked, is it important to agree on the facts at hand or agree on the problem that needs to be solved? And then I want to follow that with a question from Rebecca. Rebecca, I'm going to get to yours next. But Karen said, how do you have a civil discussion when the person you are talking with does not believe that what you have experienced is true? So, both of these are, do we set ground rules? Do we give the benefit of the doubt to understand where the other person's coming from, and we're trying to accept their experience, even if it's not our experience? So what do you guys think about that?
I think those are good questions. And particularly today, when we're dealing with issues in which people have had vastly different experiences and don't understand the experience perhaps of other groups. In terms of agreeing on the facts, I don't think it's important to start out with an agreement or ever get to an actual agreement. I think it's important to keep talking and to keep checking your own self and your own views, and not get so smug that you're immovable. If you approach this with the idea of not that I'm going to change that person, make that person better. If you approach it from the idea that, I can maybe make me better, and maybe there's a place I need to move to. Be honest with yourself in a discussion, and you might get more out of it.
The facts versus nonsense or fiction argument is a really important one right now, because I can't think of another time, in fact, when there was so much doubt about fact, or where there were so many interested parties in casting doubt on fact, using information in pretty nefarious ways. And it's not just individuals in social media. I mean, we have entire nations whose intelligence communities are now dedicated to the idea of making us question things that are true. I don't know how many people saw the interview that Axios did with President Trump the other day, but I thought that was a really great example of the way that you respond to someone who's trying to suggest that the truth is not the truth. I mean, the president tried during that interview many times to recast fact in a way that was just disingenuous, and in some cases just wrong. And the person sitting talking to him, interviewing him, was really calm about the way that he kept going back with the actual facts to say, no, that's actually not right. Here's what actually happened. Here's what's actually going on. And I think that's probably the best you can do when you're dealing with someone like that, is to stay on truth and stay vigilant about asserting truth in the face of someone who is really trying to dissemble in the way that the president does on almost a daily basis. I mean, this is somebody whose motivations with regard to the truth are pretty despicable, in my opinion. At the same time, what Nolan's saying about when you are having an argument with someone you disagree with, I think you do have to guard against being too fast to say, well, that person is not telling the truth. In a lot of cases, it's just that they don't see it the same way you do, and that is the source of your disagreement. But again, I also would reinforce the idea of that sort of methodical and calm response, sticking to truth and sticking to fact, and trying to avoid the kind of emotional, visceral responses that I think devolve conversations too often into antagonism. It's really hard to do, but I think that's one of the keys to being able to maintain these kind of interactions.
And then you have to decide too, do you want a diverse group of friends in terms of their viewpoints? Do you find value in associating with people who hold a variety of viewpoints that might be different than yours? I think one of the things that the modern media has done to us, particularly the cable television shows, is put us in camps, and we feel very comfortable in our own camp. But where's our ability to grow if the only people we're surrounded by are the people who affirm us and don't challenge us? There's value in being challenged, and you have to accept that, or there's really no point, because you're okay where you are if all you want to do is hear an echo of your own opinions.
So we have a couple of questions related to politics, and I think it's a really important topic this year. Also dealing with the Lansing Chamber, so you guys are just in the thick of it in our capital. So we have a question from Rebecca that asks, has term limits made it worse in Michigan? I've heard stories from Pat Gagliardi about how different it was when they all lived together in Lansing. And then Lisa said, how do you decide which friendships and relationships are not worth discussing politics or other sensitive topics in? There are ways to have deep relationships without going into those topics, but what are your suggestions? So do we have these political debates in friendships, and then have term limits made it worse for us in Michigan?
Well, let's start with term limits, because that's been a crusade of mine almost since the day they came in. I think they've made things horribly worse, not just in terms of personal relationships, but in policy making. It's, we have too many amateurs now in the legislature. I don't know why we think politics isn't like every other profession, that experience and expertise has values. I mean, it's one of the few professions I can think of where we treat experience as a bad thing. So we got a whole lot of people up there now who don't understand what their role is, don't know what they can do and can't do under the Constitution. And, you know, it's encourages partisanship, and it encourages hyper-partisanship, and everybody is always looking on to, you know, it's a pogo stick mentality. What's the next job I'm going to hop to? They've been horrible, term limits.
Yeah, I mean, term limits, I think, are one of our sort of core fundamental shortcomings right now in Michigan, and have been. I mean, it was a terrible idea to begin with, and it has played out in ways that I think even the critics of it, when it was passed, would not have imagined. I mean, it's not just that we have too many amateurs in Lansing. By definition, everybody is an amateur because they can't stay long enough to become experts. Lee Chatfield is a great example. He's the Speaker of the House, the leader of the lower chamber. He's 32 years old. And has only been in the legislature for 5 years. He hasn't had time to develop any kind of expertise, and he won't get it. As soon as he gets to the point where he might develop some, he's got to either go to the Senate or leave. The other, I think, the tandem sort of problem with term limits is partisan line drawing, which aggravates the term limits issue. The way that we have for a long time decided who represents who in Michigan favors a kind of partisanship that makes the choices that people have in their districts really narrow. They are among hyper-partisans and only slightly less hyper-partisans, and there's not a real range. And so you combine those two, and it explains a lot of the difficulty we have getting really serious things done in the state. Now, we've changed the district line drawing in a way that should produce a different outcome. We'll see if it's better. It will be different. But we haven't taken on term limits yet because, you know, despite the fact that they're so ineffective, they're wildly popular. I mean, whenever I say we should get rid of term limits, I hear an incredible amount of blowback from citizens who feel like it's a way to protect against lifelong legislators. But I always say, look, the people I know who were most effective at lawmaking did it for a really long time. John Dingle is a great example. Nolan mentioned him earlier. We have lots of other examples. Carl Levin here in the state of Michigan. It's not longevity that makes people ineffective. It's other things.
And you build sort of a ladder. I mean, John Engler was 20 years in the legislature when he became governor. When he got to that office, he knew exactly how the system worked and what he had to do to get something through the legislature. You think about the people, Paul Hilligans and others who we grew up covering, Steve. I mean, they understood the process and how to build alliances and, in the end, get a deal done. And it wasn't always my way or the highway. I mean, there was a lot of consensus building, and there had to be because people did have job security, if you will. I don't see how this has made things better. The other part of the question, Lynn, was
Lisa asked about having friendships and relationships where you may not want to have these political discussions. How do you know when it's safe to do and when it's just not worth your time?
And that's, that's your choice, and you judge the individual situation. But I'll tell a story from one of our early sessions, civility sessions, when we were doing them in person. And there were two women who came. They were neighbors, and they for 10 years had walked together every morning to get their exercise. And they were different political viewpoints, different political parties, and they had never talked about politics because they were frightened to. They just didn't want the friendship to blow up. So they talk about everything else, and could have gone on just fine like that. But they participated in this session. They talked to each other about their values and experiences, and a lot of the assumptions they had made about each other sort of went away. They had assumed people voted one way or the other because of this, that, or the other thing, and then they started learning the actual reasons behind their political decision making. They better understood each other. They didn't come to any kind of conversion or agreement. They both still were who they were, but they developed the trust they needed to broaden that relationship in terms of being able to talk about difficult things. Because if you can learn to talk about politics, maybe you can learn to talk about race, maybe you can learn to talk about the other really hard things to talk about that we shy away from. And increasingly, that's what we're doing. There was a poll the other day. Cato had a poll. Something like 65% of Americans are afraid to express their views in the public square, afraid to talk to other people about their political views. That is not a healthy place as a nation, because it drives everything underground. It drives dissent underground, where it can fester and develop into a really bad thing.
So Fonda had a really interesting question that we've never been asked before.
What was the name?
Fonda?
Yeah, that was my sister's name.
Oh, very cool. She wants to know, did Stephen and Nolan set ground rules of engagement? And if you did, could you name a few of these key rules?
That's a great question.
Have a bourbon first was number one.
I was to say, bourbon had a lot to do with it. The one of the things that I don't know that we set ground rules so much as there were things that I think made it work better or easier. And one of them was, early on, we both discovered that we do have a real appreciation for bourbon, and that's not just us joking, but that led us to know that that we both had roots in Kentucky. Nolan is from Kentucky, and I spent the first 2.5 years of my career working in Kentucky, and I have a real fondness for that time and that place. It was one of those moments where you're talking with someone, you're getting to know somebody who is an obvious opposite of you, and you find that sort of common ground, you find that common link that gets you beyond the differences between the two of you, or the opposition. I also think that we started out on television together, doing this as sort of opposites, yin and yang. There's rules there, right? I mean, it can only devolve to a certain point in front of the camera, and so I think that also helps avoid some of the more obnoxious things that people might say or do, I guess. But something I said earlier, I think is a really important ground rule, and that is this idea of never really walking away. This idea of not ever reaching the point where you say, I'm just done with this. I'm done with this person. I'm done with this conversation. I'm not coming back to it. I think that really matters. And I don't know that that's something we ever discussed or said, we've got to have an agreement about this. But I do think it's a key part of the interaction, that I think we both know that I'm going to continue to talk to this person. And I think that changes in our minds sometimes the way in which you interact, right? If you know that this is someone you are going to be interacting with over a long period of time, I think you're less likely to do or say some things that would damage that relationship. So I would say that's kind of a ground rule as well.
And then we started out with, at least from my point of view, a respect. I mean, I would read Steve's work and disagree with his points, but have to grudgingly admit it was a very fine piece of writing and very persuasive. Steve's very persuasive in making his arguments. And, I found that useful from the very beginning in terms of, I had to up my game. I had to sharpen my positions. I had to not be lazy about my own argument formations. So, I found a benefit early on in the interaction.
Yeah, and that's really different. I mean, I think that's a big difference in the way that even the television opposition was framed between the two of us. I think in a lot of cases, there isn't that respect going both ways for the work, right? And I've said before, in fact, when Nolan published a collection of his columns a few years ago, I wrote a foreword to it, and I said that the value of his work to mine was really important, and that's not something I think people always would suspect, or that you would find in a lot of cases. The fact that even though I disagree with most of what he says, when I read it, when I hear it, it has a real influence on me. It has an influence on the way I think about my own work, and that's sort of a rarity, I think, in our business. But it's also a really key component of our ability to sort of keep coming back. You're coming back in part because you're getting something out of this, right? Each of us get something out of that exchange that's valuable in our own space.
And when we agree as passionately as we disagree. I mean, we both shared a very strong belief that the redevelopment of Detroit should be more inclusive. We both noticed the same things that were going on. And I think we both have a fundamental sense of fairness in terms of, no group of people should be left out of prosperity in this country.
So we have a big question from Philip, and it brings us into this conversation about race that I think is really important to address. And so he says, what is the best way to have productive discussions about contentious historical events in the US? Is it better to avoid discussions about history and focus on the future? Or is there a way to have productive discussions about it? It seems like there is a strong desire amongst many Americans to reconcile and come to terms with the past, but it seems like many of these discussions inevitably break down into contentious debates.
Well, I think you have to talk about history. You have to understand history. You can't just declare, oh, it's a new game, let's go. And I'll give an example. Several years ago, when we were looking at the affirmative action issue in Michigan, when trying to come up with an opinion at the Detroit News, we had a lot of discussion about, okay, well, we need to go ahead on merit. Everything needs to be based on merit. Everybody has the same shots. Everybody has the same level field now. And, the argument we ended up making, which was contrary to what a lot of people expected of us, was, yeah, that's now. Everybody, we can assume we have a level field and everything should be on merit. But for generations, we didn't take into account merit. We took into account race. And so we've created an underclass that we have to do something about. And that, you can't ignore the fact that of those many decades, those many generations where the field wasn't level. And, we have a responsibility to do something going forward, but you can't make the right choices about what to do going forward unless you understand what happened in the past.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I one of the things I think is true about this particular moment and the conversation that we are having, nationally about equality and injustice is making that history sort of take front and center in our lives. I mean, I think in a lot of cases, people think of history and they think of, oh, that's the past. It's so distant from me. It doesn't have as much to do with the way things are or the way that I live right now. And it's hard then to place enough value on it and then to understand how you have to counteract that history. But talking to people about the ways in which, just immediate past history affects their lives now, I think is the opportunity we have right now while we're having this conversation, and it's kind of the obligation that we have. I've been saying that this moment sort of asks all of us to really look at our lives in ways that maybe we haven't before, black and white, to really uncover the ways in which this country's history shapes all of our lives. I mean, I say all the time that people look at me in the year 2020, a successful African-American man in this country, and say, well, this is proof that things are equal, that people can make it. But which is true. It's a great example. But I can point to things that have happened in my lifetime. I can point to things, especially that happened in my parents' lifetimes, that had an effect on my ability to succeed, that had an effect on the kind of opportunity that I did. Those things matter. They still matter right now. And countering those things really matters. The things that happened to our parents happened to us. And you don't have to go back very far in any African American's life to find terrible, terrible instances of denied opportunity and discrimination. Those things are what we need to understand a lot better right now. I feel like too many people believe that history is this kind of distant looming ghost and not something that we live with every day, especially as African Americans. History still shapes a lot of our lives in ways that we could point to every hour of every day.
What I'm hearing you both say throughout this whole session is that there's this human element that is lost in a lot of conversation, perhaps because we're having them from a distance. And so it brings up the issue of social media. And so many of our conversations, especially since the pandemic really hit America, have been remote. And so how do we deal with that? When you have an ability to sit across from someone and really see the humanity in them, it's really hard to dislike them or to hate them. But when you're just looking at your phone or on your computer, it's really easy to make quick judgments and dismiss people, block them, that kind of thing. So how do we build civility in this era of social media?
Well, I think we have to really strive to have those face-to-face personal conversations. I know it's been hard lately, and I think that's caused a lot of stress to people. But I have acquaintances, I have friends, the only way they want to communicate is through text, through other social media methods. And the opportunity for miscommunication is so much greater when you're doing that. And the opportunity for incivility is so much greater. I have never you know, I worked in the era before social media. And I mean, in my mind, it changed everything in terms of the tone of our conversation. That, and it's not even anonymity. People know who you are, but that sort of shield that people think the social media platforms provide them. And they'll say the most vile things. People who I've considered friends, people who I know and have interacted with, will post some of the most vile comments on social media. And I'll sometimes call them out. And I said, we're friends. What's wrong with you? And I just think it's been so unproductive, and we need to try to break through that and actually do face-to-face conversations. I don't have any answer for how to be civil when all of our communications are electronic.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems with social media right now, at least, is that it rewards bad behavior. You know, the more outlandish, the more outrageous something somebody says is, the more it gets likes or you know, shared, which is the goal of social media. I mean, the idea is that everybody is seeking a platform, and a big one, to share their ideas. I am more hopeful, I guess, about social media as a means of communication and discussion over time. I think, you know, it's a very new way of communicating with each other. If you think back just 10 years, Twitter and Facebook and Instagram were nothing like they are now. They were infants then. They are still very young now. I think the hope is that, you know, the ease of communication over social media, the ability to instantly be talking with lots of different people all at the same time, becomes more of its value, and that over time, less of the bombastic kind of behavior and dynamic becomes rewarded. Now, how long is that going to take? I don't know. Each new iteration of communication in our history, technological advances, they all initially invite this kind of disruption. The telegraph, the radio, the television, they were all once regarded as trash and purveyors of trash. But think of how critical some of them have become over time. I'm hopeful that social media gets there, and I think it can. I say that one of the ways we try to get it there is to get people to interact with it differently. I mean, this idea of instantly having to have the absolute right answer, the perfect thing to say, is one of the problems. Maybe it's okay just to use it as a thinking tool. Maybe it's okay to use it as a way to experiment with different thoughts and ideas and bounce them off of other people. That's not the culture that it has now, where everybody, no matter what they say, it's like a game of gotcha. You know, you said this thing, and now that's you for the rest of your life. You know, I think if all of us took a little more of a pause at responding to the stuff that we see on social media and made the responses more thoughtful, it might grow up a little faster.
So as we near the end of our session, and we do have a few more questions that I'd like to get to, I just want to remind everybody that we're really grateful you've spent your time with us today. If you are interested in bringing this or a similar session, we do a couple different formats, to your workplace, to your community, to your organization, please let me know. And I want to just hopefully successfully now share the Delta Dental video while I still have you guys. It's just quick, so hope you can hear this.
We are living in challenging times. Politics is polarizing. Racism is rampant. The pandemic is frightening, and families are divided. Tough times require more dialogue and more understanding. But navigating our differences constructively is hard work. Delta Dental believes that healthy, smart, vibrant communities are also civil and harmonious. They are places where disagreement does not have to be toxic or destructive. Civility starts with listening. Welcome to the Civility Project.
I trust everyone could hear that. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Thanks for staying around to listen to it. And thanks again to Delta Dental. Very
We're so
kind
grateful
to
that
keep
they
this
make this
conversation
possible.
going.
So one last question that I think we should end on is Cindy asked a while ago about how we pull children and teens into this conversation about building civility. And so I wonder if you have any parting thoughts about that.
Well, like everything else, by example, you know.
Yeah, by example and by encouragement. I mean, the idea that you place value on people who are not like you, people who don't think like you, people who see things differently is something that's learned, and it's learned from your parents. You know, encouraging young people to seek out different opinions and people of differing opinions and not shut them down, you know, immediately as unacceptable. I think goes a long way to opening their minds for later when they'll be asked to do that a lot more.
And dinner table is the best classroom. You know, I grew up in a family that fought furiously about politics, religion, everything else, and yet there was a tremendous amount of love between them, and it just was something I think they savored.
Absolutely. Well, Stephen and Nolan, thank you so much for delivering this civility session. Thank you to everybody who came and shared your lunch hour with us, and to the Lansing Chamber and all of the partners, and of course to Delta Dental for making this possible. So thank you, everybody, and we'd love to bring this to you.
Thank you.
Thanks.